1 in the morning. On the top floor, the last two lights in the penthouse office finally went dark. Leo Vance rubbed his raw, tired eyes and let out a long sigh. He saved the final line of code, only then daring to shut down the whining, company-issued laptop. The hallway was eerily quiet, the moonlight tracing his lean silhouette on the polished floor. He reached the elevator bank, his fingertip hovering over the call button, when a sharp ding from the adjacent elevator shattered the silence. Leo's heart jumped. He instinctively straightened his back. The crisp, rhythmic click of high heels on marble echoed down the hall, each step carrying an unnerving pressure as they drew closer. Isabella Sterling emerged. The expensive black cashmere coat she wore seemed to carry the cold night air with it, making her skin look even paler and her expression even more severe. She might as well have had "Keep Out" tattooed on her forehead. She was the company's CEO, the woman who made the entire workforce hold its breath. She was also infuriatingly drop-dead gorgeous. Her temper was legendary and her standards were impossibly high, but the salary and benefits were so good that everyone both loved and hated her for it. Leo held his breath, trying to shrink into the wall. He was fresh out of college, hired on a fluke after a hackathon went sideways in his favor. It felt less like he'd earned his spot and more like he'd gotten ridiculously lucky. He was still getting used to the low-pressure system that constantly followed the Ice Queen CEO. Isabella's gaze swept across the hallway. It was a casual glance, but it froze the moment it landed on the side of Leo's face. Her famously stoic, beautiful eyes flickered with a rare, violent tremor before shifting into something intensely complex. Leo's scalp prickled under her stare. He had no idea what to do with his hands or feet, and could only manage to force out two stiff words. "Ms. Sterling." The air thickened for a few seconds. Her eyes traced the lines of his face, lingering on his brow and the curve of his jaw. After a long moment, her perfectly shaped, tightly pressed lips finally parted. Her voice was as cold as her aura. "Leo Vance? The new guy in engineering?" "Why, yes, Miss Sterling." Leo could feel a thin sheen of sweat on his back. Isabella said nothing more, just gave him one last, deep look. Then she turned away, her expression unreadable as she pressed the down button for the elevator. Leo didn't dare breathe as he stood beside her in the elevator. The small space was filled with the scent of expensive perfume and the invisible weight of her presence. Every second felt like a century. The elevator opened into the underground parking garage. Isabella strode out first, but she stopped short when she passed his beat-up 10-speed, a bike where everything rattled except the bell. "Leo Vance." Her voice, sharp and clear, echoed in the cavernous space. "Here." Leo flinched as if he'd been zapped. Isabella turned around. Her eyes were calm, but her words were utterly devoid of warmth. "I require a contractual boyfriend to manage expectations for my family. I will pay you an additional $5,000 a month. You will only be required to accompany me to certain events. The term is indefinite. The conditions are simple." She paused, her gaze as sharp as a scalpel. "Don't cross any lines. Shelve any inappropriate ideas you might have." Leo's brain went into static overload. A contract boyfriend? Isabella Sterling? $5,000 a month? Images flooded his mind. The decaying roof of his parents' house back in Ohio, his father's mountain of medical bills, his own pathetic entry-level salary. The overwhelming need for money crowded out all rational thought. There's no such thing as a free lunch. But this felt like a winning lottery ticket had just smacked him in the face. The words tumbled out of his mouth before he could stop them. "I'm in." Isabella seemed momentarily surprised by his quick agreement. She gave a slight nod, then pulled a key card from her designer handbag and handed it to him with a brisk, efficient motion. "Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. Move into the Azure Heights, penthouse 8. Don't be late." Without another glance, she walked toward a sleek, black Bentley, leaving him with nothing but the sight of her impossibly elegant and resolute back. Leo stood there, clutching the cold plastic keycard. A gust of wind swirled through the garage, and he finally shivered, a delayed reaction to the sheer insanity of the moment. Was this a golden opportunity, or was he about to get seriously burned? The Azure Heights, penthouse 8, felt less like a home and more like an expensive, sterile showroom. Leo stood in the foyer with his worn duffel bag, feeling as awkward and out of place as a child. Isabella, draped in a silk robe, was curled up on a massive sofa in the living room, a document in her hand. She didn't even look up. "The first floor guest room is yours. Keep common areas tidy. My office and bedroom are off limits." Her instructions were concise, her voice void of any warmth. "At the office, we are strangers. Understand?" "Understood, Miss Sterling." Leo nodded emphatically. He understood perfectly. The $5,000 a month wasn't just a salary. It was a non-disclosure agreement with a built-in restraining order. From the very beginning, this was nothing more than a transaction. That boundary was quickly etched into his daily life. Leo remembered his role, a paid actor. At the office, he buried his head in his code. If he happened to pass Isabella in the hall, he would immediately transform into the most deferential employee, offering a polite greeting without making eye contact. Her response was always a clipped, dismissive hum, or she would simply walk past him as if he were invisible. Back at the Azure Heights, the boundary was a cold, cavernous silence. There was always a single takeout container on the dining table, or a gourmet meal box that was barely touched. Isabella spent most of her time locked away in her office or bedroom, leaving Leo alone in the vast, quiet apartment. Having grown up pinching pennies, the sight of all that wasted food made his heart ache. Finally, one evening, he tentatively decided to cook a simple pasta aglio e olio in the kitchen. The warm aroma of garlic and olive oil drifted through the silent penthouse. As he was carrying his bowl toward his room, he heard footsteps on the stairs. Isabella came down, dressed in lounge clothes, probably to get some water. She followed the scent to the dining room entrance and paused, her eyes landing on the steaming bowl of pasta garnished with parsley. Her gaze flicked from the bowl to Leo's nervous face. She didn't speak, but she didn't leave either. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. "Miss Sterling, I made too much. Would you like to try some?" Isabella didn't answer. She simply pulled out a chair and sat down, her posture analytical. Leo quickly placed the bowl in front of her and fetched a clean set of silverware from the kitchen. She picked up the fork, elegantly twirled a few strands of pasta, and brought them to her lips. Leo watched her face, his breath held. She chewed slowly, her expression as unreadable as ever. But in her perpetually cool eyes, a flicker of something faint, almost imperceptible, seemed to pass through. She offered no praise, no critique. She just silently finished the small portion. From that day on, the kitchen lights were on more often. Leo wasn't a gourmet chef, but his cooking was heartfelt and comforting. The number of times Isabella appeared at the dining table quietly increased. She remained a woman of few words, the silence at dinner broken only by the soft clink of silverware. But Leo noticed things. She would occasionally take a second helping of his braised short ribs. When he made chicken soup, she would silently have another small bowl. 3 years slipped by in this subtle, unspoken rhythm. Leo meticulously upheld his end of the bargain, keeping the apartment immaculate and tailoring his cooking more and more to Isabella's tastes. And Isabella, though still an ice queen at the office, seemed to be slowly thawing at home. She would let her fingers brush against the back of his hand when he passed her a bowl of soup. One rainy night, when they were both working late from home, she sent him a text that was completely out of character. "There's homemade bone broth in the fridge." Ripples began to spread across the surface of Leo's heart. Ripples he didn't dare examine too closely. He found himself growing addicted to the false warmth that blossomed in the quiet intimacy of their shared meals. It was time for his annual physical. For 3 years, like clockwork, Isabella had insisted he go to her private clinic for a full executive workup. Her reasoning was cold and corporate. The physical condition of a contractual partner is integral to the fulfillment of the agreement. Leo just took it as a capitalist's routine maintenance on her assets. A few days later, a sealed envelope containing the lab results was delivered to Isabella's office. She had just finished a grueling international video conference, and a trace of exhaustion lined her brow. She tore open the envelope casually, her eyes scanning down to the summary. Suddenly, all the air seemed to be sucked out of the room. The exhaustion vanished from Isabella's face, replaced by a ghastly pallor. Her fingers clenched, crumpling the thick paper. The crisp report crackled under the pressure. Her perpetually cool eyes were now wide with a horrified, disbelieving shock. Deep in her pupils, something shattered. On the report, the damning diagnosis burned into her retinas like a branding iron. Terminal stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Leo knew nothing about this. He only knew that Isabella had started acting weird. It began at the dinner table. He had just picked up his fork when a piece of perfectly cooked braised short rib was placed in his bowl. Leo looked up, startled, to see Isabella's face as placid as ever. Her movement was so natural it looked rehearsed 1,000 times. Only the depths of her eyes held a profound, suppressed sorrow. Eat more. Her voice sounded normal, but the last word trembled slightly. It's nutrient-dense. Leo stared at the short rib in his bowl, completely bewildered. Had health frozen over? Isabella Sterling was serving him food and talking about nutrients? He glanced at her, but she had already looked down, focusing intently on pushing around the few grains of rice in her own bowl, her long eyelashes hiding her expression. It got weirder. Leo got up in the middle of the night for a glass of water. Passing through the living room, he saw a figure in a silk nightgown, her back to him, hunched over the coffee table. In the faint glow from the window, he saw she was carefully examining his bottle of daily multivitamins. She moved with an almost reverent caution, a frantic energy in her posture. It was Isabella. Leo nearly dropped his glass. He shrank back into the shadows, holding his breath. He heard her pick up the bottle, using the dim light of her phone screen to read the tiny print on the label, her voice a barely audible whisper. 30 minutes after a meal, not on an empty stomach. This dosage. Her words were saturated with a desperate, all-consuming concern. Leo leaned against the cold wall, his heart pounding. What was wrong with her? Had she lost her mind? The most bizarre incident happened at work. The office AC had been blasting for days, and Leo had developed a small tickle in his throat. He let out 2 soft coughs. The colleague at the next desk didn't even notice. But the door to the CEO's private office flew open. Isabella stormed out, crossing the open-plan office in a few long strides. Her face was deathly pale, and the rims of her eyes were turning red with alarming speed, shimmering with unshed tears. She stared at Leo, her lips trembling, her voice urgent and raw with an almost frantic promise. Leo, are you okay? What's wrong? Don't be afraid. Any test, any treatment, the best medicine, the best hospitals. I'll cover everything. Do you hear me? Everything. The entire office went dead silent. Every employee stared, their eyes wide with disbelief at the apocalyptic, surreal scene unfolding before them. The notoriously frosty CEO was on the verge of tears over a junior programmer and offering to cover all his medical bills. What kind of bizarre drama was this? Leo was petrified, stunned into silence by the sheer force of her words and the deep, undisguised anguish in her eyes. He opened his mouth, but his throat felt like it was stuffed with cotton. He looked at her reddened eyes, at the fierce way she fought back her tears, and a ridiculous, terrifying thought wormed its way into his brain. Oh God, does she have feelings for me? But this reaction, this is way too tragic for a simple crush. The days passed in a strange, heavy atmosphere. Isabella started spending more and more time at the penthouse. She canceled countless meetings and dinners, even delegating the critical monthly earnings call to her COO. The dining table became an exhibition of bizarre, cancer-fighting foods. One evening, a bowl of dark, murky soup that smelled strongly of medicinal herbs was pushed in front of him. Drink it. Isabella's tone was non-negotiable, but her eyes were locked on him, filled with a fragile hope and hidden pain. Leo looked at the soup, which resembled a failed chemistry experiment, and his stomach churned. He fought the urge to gag and finally summoned his courage. Miss Sterling, I actually feel fine. Don't you think you're being a little too worried? Isabella's hand, holding her fork, jerked violently. The tines clattered against the rim of her bowl. She shot her head up, her gaze sharp, pinning him in place. Her eyes were a maelstrom of anger, fear, and the flustered shame of being caught. Leo, what do you know? Is your body even yours anymore? I said drink it. Leo was stunned. My body isn't mine? When did that happen? Beneath her harsh tone was a thick, unmistakable sob she could no longer hide. Something seized Leo's heart, twisting it painfully. He didn't dare say another word. He just pinched his nose and forced down the bitter, soul-crushing soup. That night, as a light rain pattered against the window, Leo lay in bed, wide awake. Isabella's recent behavior played on a loop in his mind. Her red-rimmed eyes, her trembling voice, the vulnerable curve of her back as she examined his vitamin bottle. And the medical report he still hadn't seen. A thought crept into his mind, tightening around his heart like a vine. What if there really is something wrong with me? Isabella's reaction. Is she pitying me? The realization sent a chill through him, a cold dread that shot up from his feet to the crown of his head. He sat bolt upright, gasping for air, his pajamas instantly soaked with cold sweat. No, he had to know what was on that report. The next day was Saturday. Leo, sporting two giant dark circles under his eyes, paced anxiously in the living room. Isabella was curled up in an armchair by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a book in her lap. The pages hadn't turned in a very long time. Her gaze was fixed on a misty rain outside, but her eyes were vacant, her entire being shrouded in a deep, impenetrable sadness. Leo took a deep breath, walked over to her, and spoke, his voice dry with nerves. "Miss Sterling." Isabella flinched as if startled, looking up at him. Her eyes were questioning, but layered with that now familiar, deep-seated worry. About my last physical. The report. Leo licked his dry lips, forcing the words out. Can I see it? I feel perfectly fine, really." "There's nothing to see." Isabella cut him off instantly, her tone harsh. She reflexively pulled a manila folder on the table beside her closer, a movement so quick it was almost an admission of guilt. "It was a routine checkup. The important thing is that you feel fine." She turned her face to the window, her jaw tight, as if she were holding back an ocean of emotion. Her reaction was all the confirmation Leo needed. His heart plummeted. A massive, suffocating fear gripped him, his voice taking on a desperate edge he didn't recognize. "Ms. Sterling, are you hiding something from me? Is there something wrong with the report? Just tell me." "I said there's nothing." Isabella shot to her feet, her voice climbing to a sharp, breaking point. Her chest heaved, her eyes instantly flooding with tears that she stubbornly refused to let fall. "Leo, can you just stop asking? You just have to. Stay healthy. You have to." The rest of her words were choked off by a wave of grief. Her desperate, shattered expression broke through Leo's final defenses. He stumbled back a step, a sob catching in his own throat. "What do you mean, stay healthy? Don't I even have the right to know what's killing me? Isabella, what do you take me for? Some pathetic charity case you can pity on his way out?" "I'm not," Isabella cried out, the dam finally breaking as hot tears streamed down her cheeks. She looked at Leo's agonized face, at the fear and accusation in his eyes. The report she'd been hiding, the one that served as his death sentence, became the last straw. With a soft thud, the manila folder slipped from her trembling hand and fell onto the plush rug. A few pages scattered out. On the top sheet, the words "terminal stage for cancer" lay exposed in stark black ink, naked in the cold air between them. Leo's gaze locked onto the text. His mind went blank with a roar of white noise. "Terminal? Cancer?" He staggered, grabbing the back of the sofa to steady himself. His face was ashen, his lips moved, but no sound came out. So, it was real. I'm really dying? No wonder. No wonder she was acting so strange. A dead silence descended on the living room, broken only by Isabella's ragged, suppressed sobs. Just then, the shrill, jarring ring of a cell phone tore through the suffocating grief. It was Isabella's phone, vibrating furiously on the coffee table. She seemed not to hear it, her eyes fixed on Leo's devastated face. The phone kept ringing, relentless. The sound finally pierced through Leo's stupor. He numbly looked toward the noise. Isabella, pulled back to reality by the incessant ringing, wiped clumsily at her tears. She answered the call without looking at the screen, putting it on speaker, her voice hoarse and broken. "Hello." A man's anxious but excited voice came through the speaker. It was Dr. Alex Chun, her longtime friend and a rising star at Seattle General. Isabella, thank God you finally answered. I've been freaking out. That medical report you had me look into for Leo Vance. I had my team double-check the raw data and the original sample. We figured it out. Isabella held the phone, her eyes vacant, the words not registering. Alex's voice, fast and clear, filled the silent room. It was a mix-up, a clerical error. The hospital's data entry system glitched that day. There are 2 patients with the same name. His healthy report got swapped with the terminal patient's file. I just reviewed your Leo Vance's results again. Every single marker is perfect. He's healthy as a horse. It was a false alarm. Can you believe it? So, Isabella didn't hear the rest. Her hand, holding the phone, was frozen in mid-air. The tears were still wet on her cheeks, but her expression was one of absolute, stupefied disbelief. She whipped her head around to look at Leo, who was equally petrified. Time seemed to stop. After a few agonizing seconds, Leo finally processed the information bomb that had just been dropped. He looked at Isabella's face, a chaotic canvas of tear tracks, shock, and confusion that was slowly being overtaken by a tidal wave of post-traumatic relief and profound absurdity. An unidentifiable emotion surged through him. The fear receded, replaced by a raw, indignant, and hilariously misplaced anger. He pointed at the now useless death sentence on the floor, then pointed at himself. His voice, high with emotion, was a mix of accusation and disbelief. Miss Sterling, I told you I was fine. I told you. See? I had a tickle in my throat from the chili flakes on my pizza last week. Was that really necessary? The weird soups, the crying. He trailed off, looking at her utterly dumbstruck expression, the rest of his rant dying in his throat. Wah! A sob, long suppressed and violently released, erupted from her, as if all her bones had dissolved, as if a soul-crushing weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Isabella's composure shattered. She stumbled forward and threw herself at Leo, crashing into his chest with a desperate force. Caught off guard, Leo staggered back but instinctively wrapped his arms around her. Isabella clung to the front of his shirt, burying her face in his chest as hot tears soaked through the fabric. Her body shook with violent sobs, no longer quiet and controlled, but a full-throated, heartbreaking wail. It was as if she was trying to expel all the fear, despair, grief, and the overwhelming, terrifying joy of this moment all at once. You liar, Leo. You big liar, she sobbed, her words muffled and nonsensical as she pounded her fists weakly against his back. You scared me to death. Do you have any idea? How could you? Sob. Even if it's just chili flakes. You're not allowed to die. Do you hear me? I forbid it. The contract isn't over. You still owe me. You owe me. All her coldness, her pride, her carefully constructed boundaries, they all disintegrated in that moment, leaving only a raw, primal fear and the dizzying relief of having him back. Leo held her stiffly, feeling the soft warmth of her body trembling in his arms. He felt her tears scalding his skin, heard her illogical, tyrannical, and utterly vulnerable accusations. The terror of the terminal diagnosis completely evaporated, replaced by a roaring, molten flood that instantly obliterated the dam in his heart-labeled contract. So, her strange tenderness, her clumsy concern, her late-night worries, her barely contained tears. They were never about pity. He tightened his arms, holding the CEO, now just a woman crying her heart out, snugly against him. He rested his chin on the top of her head, inhaling the soft scent of her hair. An unprecedented sense of peace and a fierce, overwhelming love washed over him. Okay. His voice was hoarse, laced with a relieved smile and a deep, undeniable tenderness as he gently stroked her back. I won't die. The contract isn't over. How could I? I still have to cook for you for the rest of my life. Isabella. The moment her name left his lips, he felt her body go rigid in his arms. Her crying stopped abruptly. Isabella pulled back from his embrace, looking up at him with tear-filled, hazy eyes. Her face was a mess of tear tracks, her nose was red, and her expression was one of pure, disbelieving confusion. Seeing her like this, so unguarded, so pitiful, so incredibly endearing, made Leo's heart melt. He raised a hand and gently, almost clumsily, wiped the tears from her cheek with the pad of his thumb. And another thing, he looked directly into her eyes, his voice clear and steady. "When the contract is up, I'm still not leaving." "Deal." Isabella stared at him, at his achingly sincere eyes reflecting her own tear-streaked face. After a few seconds of silence, a shaky but clear response escaped her lips. "Deal. You're on my payroll for life." All the misunderstandings, all the fear, and all the cold boundaries were washed away in a flood of hot, cleansing tears. 6 years later, the door to the CEO's office was knocked on twice, a mere formality, before being pushed open with casual confidence. Leo walked in carrying a thermal lunch container decorated with cartoon pigs, a wide, easy smile on his face. He was now the director of R&D, a core member of the company's leadership, but his playful irreverence with Isabella was ingrained. "Ms. Sterling, lunch is served." He set the container down on her cluttered desk with a soft thud. Isabella, who had been frowning at her monitor, looked up. Her face, still stunningly beautiful, held no trace of the former Ice Queen. At the sight of Leo and the familiar container, her brow smoothed, and a warm smile bloomed in her eyes. "What is it today?" she asked, putting down her pen and leaning back in her chair. "Your favorite. My signature braised short ribs, some sautéed asparagus, and—" Leo said, dramatically drawing out the last part as he efficiently opened the containers, releasing a cloud of savory steam. "A certain someone's special request, a super authentic bowl of tonkatsu ramen with extra fermented bamboo shoots." "You actually made it?" Isabella's eyes lit up. There was no trace of the woman who, years ago, had first smelled the pungent dish and theatrically plugged her nose. She immediately got up, rounded the desk, and peered into the container like a hungry kitten. "Easy, it's hot." Leo chuckled, handing her a pair of chopsticks. He instinctively reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Isabella took the chopsticks, picked up a glistening piece of short rib, and popped it in her mouth, her eyes closing in bliss. "Homemade is still the best," she mumbled. "Of course it is," Leo said, pulling up a chair and grabbing his own chopsticks, his tone smug. "Your husband's cooking is world-class." Isabella's ears turned a little pink at the word husband. She shot him a playful glare that held no heat at all. She took a big bite of the ramen, sighing contentedly at the rich, complex flavor. Then a mischievous glint appeared in her eyes. "Hey, remember that medical report? Someone was so terrified he promised the contract ending wouldn't make him leave." Leo, who had just picked up a piece of asparagus, fumbled, nearly dropping it. He immediately shot back. "That's nothing compared to someone who snuck around in the middle of the night to read a vitamin bottle, whispering 30 minutes after a meal." Leo Vance. Isabella's face flushed a brilliant shade of red. She put down her chopsticks and reached over to swat his arm. "Don't you dare. You say one more word, and I'm confiscating your ramen." "Hey, an attack on my person." Leo cried out dramatically, dodging her playful swats. The office, once a temple of cold efficiency, was now filled with laughter and the warm, comforting scent of a shared meal. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating a corner of Isabella's desk. A simple silver frame sat there. It no longer held a blurry photo of some past ideal. Instead, it was a candid shot. In the picture, Leo was in their kitchen, wearing an apron, wrestling with a much too large salmon, a comical, frustrated look on his face and a smudge of flour on his cheek. In the corner of the photo, a slender hand had deliberately photobombed the shot, flashing a tiny, triumphant peace sign. Isabella had taken that picture,